Hey everyone, thanks for joining the Amplitude of Tech podcast. I'm Shawn, Chief Marketing Officer of Amplix. Today I spoke to John Diatto from a company called Omilia. We talked about conversational intelligence, deterministic versus probabilistic AI, and AI orchestration, among a bunch of other things. This was a great conversation. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. John Diatto, welcome to the Amplitude of Tech podcast. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Shawn.
Why don't you just tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, like you said, my name is John Diatto. I have been within the AI space for the last 6 odd years. I've been working at a company called Omilia, which focuses on conversational intelligence. The predominance of my time there has been within enterprise sales. And more recently, as we're expanding the company, I've been asked to help head up the channel sales team here in North America. Originally from Milan, Italy, been in the States for over 10 years, dual citizen, happy to be here.
All right. Diatto. That's
yeah, it's real Italian. Yeah, it's real Italian. If we got to speak Italian, I got it. It's my mother tongue. And most of the time people don't believe me that I am. So it's a fun little experiment from time to time. Great party trick.
Yeah, I believe it. I picked up the, when we started here, I asked you how to pronounce it and I said Diatto.
I've heard it butchered in worse ways, so don't worry about it.
But you know what? I'm Italian too, so just not that Italian. I guess maybe 30 or 40%, something like that. Anyway, let's talk about AI because that's what everyone is here for, not lineage. So let's start off with just kind of framing this conversation, right? So we talk a lot about conversational intelligence on the podcast here. It's obviously, one of the areas of AI that has penetrated the enterprise early and deeply. So what we haven't really talked much about is taking a step back and maybe talking about how we got here and what the transition has looked like for people. So let's go back pre-conversational intelligence and let's talk about how did businesses engage with customers that were calling in and how did they kind of route them through the contact center?
Yeah, I actually love this question, Shawn. So, having been with Omilia for over 6 years now, it's been really interesting to see how the zeitgeist, the layman's understanding of what AI can do versus what they thought it could do has vastly changed, right? Like before, I remember, going through airports and telling people I work, they asked me like, oh, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, I work in AI. And it was just mind blown. And now it's so commonplace and almost oversaturated where there's either a distrust for it or generally just again, oversaturation, not interested in hearing about it anymore. And I think when you look back historically, and sometimes still to this day, having those customer experiences where you're calling in and you are subject to, a biblically long expose or a biblically long, diatribe on, hey, blah, 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 press 1 for this, plus 2 for that. And maybe I need to press 8 and I am subject to having to listen to all of that, right? It's not fun and it's also not cost effective. And I think today there is a little bit of apprehension around AI. Is it going to take our jobs? Is it going to do this? Is it going to do that? But ultimately, when we're talking about customer experiences and customer service, people want to get a resolution to their issue as quickly as possible. And conversational intelligence allows us to effectively kind of cut down that really big dialogue tree that people are subject to and have to like a marble, like a roots and shoots, this way, that way, this way, that's, oh, I made a mistake. I got to go all the way back to the top again. And we cut this tree down and we just put the customer in the center and you say, hey, welcome to ABC Bank. How may I help you? And just allowing free form, human-like conversation to navigate the customer from what their need is to an actual resolution, right? And I think that's really where we sit at today. And I can expand on that, but I'm sure, you might have other questions for me.
We'll definitely expand on that. But, so I'm the type of person that whenever I call in, either what I need is number 8 or 10 or 12, and I check out by the time I get to option number 8. And so I'm, starting over from the beginning, or what I'm calling about doesn't quite fit into any of those buckets, right? I'm probably only calling because there's some sort of nuance that I couldn't deal with in a self-serve type of manner. That's a frustration that I have. But I also, I personally I feel like I'm a little uncomfortable with the open conversation with the AI because I don't I don't necessarily trust it yet, right? I mean, I'm obviously exposed to it in so many aspects of my life, but it still feels a little bit uncomfortable. So I guess the conversation tends to be framed as IVR versus conversational AI. Does it have to be framed that way? You were, yeah.
Right. So the false binary between like IVR, rigid IVR, and more conversational frameworks, right? So there is right that legacy IVR, right? And like I was saying, you might need to hit 8, but more likely than not, you're going to be smashing 0 to just get to an agent because you have this assumption, right, that it's going to be faster to talk to a human to get what you need. On the other hand of things, you have more conversational AI frameworks which have really impressive demos and look really shiny, but sometimes, more often than not, I mean, we've all heard the horror stories, right? And some of us have actually lived them. And they say weird things. They're not trusted, right? But more importantly, from an enterprise perspective, they're not easily auditable. So there's no real means of determining how to control what it will say and what's really happening in the box, right? It's like, the open, Schrodinger's cat in the box. Like, how are the decisions being made? And there's a lot there that happens within that black box that if you're not able to tune it, you're not going to be able to instill trust, right? And I think we've all seen the headlines, right? And I think one of the first ones that really came out was, I believe, it was Air Canada, where someone had to ask for like a bereavement cancellation. And the bot was like, yeah, man, all good. Like, no problem. We got you. And by the time he needed to, get a refund or whatever, Air Canada said no. He pointed to the bot. They said it's a different legal entity. The court, ruled in favor of the customer. So there is a little bit about needing to have some level of compliance and determinism when handling things that are really important, like transferring money, ensuring your medical things are lined up, that your claims are correctly filled, that you're going to get your prescriptions filled, versus like, hey, conversationally, what kind of roller do I need for this specific paint if I'm painting on the outside? And ultimately, there's a lot of talk about tokens. And I think a lot of people are just like, even is a token? How can I forecast a token? So you have this framework that customers hate, likely just circumvent because everyone knows how to smash 0. And then you have this new kind of approach to things, which is perceivably reckless, says weird things, sometimes hallucinates, both to the detriment of the customer and the enterprise. And, among all of this, what's frothing to the surface is this notion of tokens. And if you're an enterprise and you're a CFO, how do you even forecast a token? And when you're looking at these new models that are coming up, they get more expensive every single day. And ultimately, when customers or enterprises see this kind of shift in the market happen, there is a huge kick in the butt and a huge need for inertia to get off legacy IVR and get aboard of this mandate of we got to do AI. But if you don't understand when to leverage the best of deterministic models, LLMs, and more probabilistic or agentic models, and creating like SLMs, small language models, you're going to have a hard time, right? Because there's a time and place for one model and a time and place for the other. But the seamlessness and how you stitch them together is really important in regards to the customer experience and also projectability for cost for an enterprise. Ultimately, everyone wants kind of the same thing. It's just verbiage differently, right? Everyone wants to be serviced faster, so better customer experience. Enterprises want to have better operational costs, but both the customer and the enterprise want a secure interaction. And the enterprise also wants to understand how is that interaction making the decisions that it's making, and how can we fine tune it from day one moving forward. Because as soon as you start day one, if you're not consistently tuning and making the solution better based on customer interactions, you're going to start heading into decay.
So you started going into the next area that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to have you just back up for a second, set up the problem. What is deterministic versus probabilistic, and what does that mean for someone architecting?
Yeah, sure. So in layman's term, deterministic, regulators love it, customers hate it, right? You're smashing at 8, some are smashing 0. They want to get to an agent as quickly as possible. It handles the call as you would expect it. Customer says something unexpected, it's a dead end. You're routing to an agent. That handle time is lost. You're not containing that call, right? You're not keeping the customer's request in an automated loop, right? You're having to dedicate that call to a human resource. So it's predictable, it's auditable, explainable, rigid. Probabilistic, on the other hand, calculates the most likely answer. So not definitely, but most likely. And in regulated industries, this is really difficult to wrap your head around, right? Agentic, which is a word that gets thrown around a lot, is really kind of just the executive layer of a probabilistic model, right? We're saying what was most likely to be done, and here are the tasks I need to do to ensure that what the customer most probably wants to get done gets done. And I think that's the kind of the main difference, right? And like I said earlier, you're going to want a deterministic model when you're handling things that are highly regulatory or compliant, transferring money, asking about claims, verifying identity. And you're going to want more probabilistic or agentic kind of things when you're calling, say, hey, I'm calling about that thing last week. I'm just wanting to ensure that, like I mentioned earlier, the paint I'm choosing is the right for the outside if I live in these kind of climates. It's a customer describing a pain point they need help with.
Yeah. So I used to sell phone systems for Lucent Technologies way before Avaya was even a thing. And one of the best parts about selling phone systems was I learned the different ways to actually get to a human being. So it's not just zero, right? Like you said, sometimes you press 8. So when I would call into a place and I would recognize it as like a legend or a Merlin Magics or whatever, I knew how to route to a human being. And I'm that type of person because, and I'm doing it right now, I feel like I have to over explain things, right? So I need a human being. I need to, kind of talk through what I'm thinking. And I feel like there's nuances to these things. So in the interest of continuing to over explain things, in philosophy, there's this problem called determinism, right? There's this idea that your brain is a predictive modeling engine. It is over time, the wiring of your brain is plastic, right? So it starts to wire itself to expect certain things based off of real life experience that you've had, right? So if every time you touch the stove when it's glowing red, you get burned, your brain wires that glowing red equals hot. So if you see glowing red in another context, your brain predicts that it's probably going to be hot, right? So the idea of determinism is it's this wiring that tells us what we're going to do, right? It's not some internal locus of control that is separate and apart from the wiring and the material of your brain. It is the wiring of your brain that are making the decisions. And then there are counters to this. There's compatibilism and all these other different directions. But the question that these philosophers ask, that the hard determinists that say that your brain is really just acting based off of its wiring, the question that they pose is, could you have done otherwise? And I think that that's a good framing for the difference between deterministic and probabilistic AI, right? Could the AI model have done differently? So the LLMs that we're all familiar with, they're probabilistic because they've been trained on, all of the data on the entire internet. And so it learns that when someone says, they need to talk to someone about canceling their account, they probably mean that they need to, it's obvious, cancel the account, but people can say that in different ways, right? They can say, I don't want to be a customer anymore or whatever, right? So it infers what they're trying to say. What you're saying though, is there are critical moments in customer experience that we don't want probable. We don't want probably. We want definitely. And the example that you gave is wiring money, right? Giving wire instructions. Like you want to make sure that money goes where it's supposed to go, not probably where it wants to go. So maybe just kind of expand on, when you would use one versus the other. And I think you also mentioned small language models. So how does that fit into this?
Yeah. So you said a couple of things I definitely want to pick apart, and I'm just going to say them now before I forget. One, you talked about LLMs and, the entirety of the internet and being able to address something, right? So I want to touch on that, but also to more directly answer your question, when you deploy a probabilistic model, when you need a deterministic one, you risk the chance of getting a hallucinated account balance, for example, or unauthorized actions. You deploy a deterministic model where you need a probabilistic one, then you're going to get, I'm sorry, I can't quite help you with that. And then that's exactly what you were saying, right? You feel the need to explain yourself. That's inherently human, right? It's part of the baseline of all communication. And if you have the need to express yourself, right? You have an utterance, what you're actually saying, but it needs to be connected to an intent, right? everyone can express a common need in a multitude of different ways. And what you're referencing with LLMs is the entirety of the internet. But when we narrow the focus and we narrow the scope to specifically customer service facing artificial intelligence, conversational AI, we go back to those 4 core pillars, right? We need to have a solution that creates a better customer experience, has better operational costs, greater security, and greater visibility into how the decisions are made. And that last part is really important, right? And a core thesis of what we do at Omilia is owning the whole tech stack, is being able to really make those determinations by virtue of the customer expressing themselves, right? So having those qualitative and quantitative insights into how customers are interfacing with a bot and interfacing with an agent. And I know a lot of vendors will be like, hey, here's a nice fancy word cloud with all these different sized fonts for different things that people are saying, right? Here's a 6-figure professional service fees to kind of make those things happen, right? And then you get locked behind supply chain and procurement, SAO evaluations. Oh, it's not the right time. Oh, we don't have the right resources. And the truth of the matter is, these are really vital interactions, and they're core to the foundation of creating a small language model. So we're not talking about a large language model that encompasses the entirety of the internet, or even a large language model that encompasses the entirety of a banking industry verticalization. We're talking about enterprise specifically, customer specific. And if you have the insights into the solution and how the people are interfacing with it and with the agents, you get that qualitative and quantitative information, the intents and the utterances, the percentage of volume of calls that are actually being said. So you can say, hey, 7.2% of people are calling toward the end of the month to ask for a deferred payment arrangement. We currently don't offer that automation. That 7.2% of calls that is not getting automated is going to an agent. That's a direct financial cost, right? And, before generative, before agentic and probabilistic, one of our customers was a key major financial bank. When you call 1-800-DISCOVER, that's Omilia's solution. And when we jumped in there, even before the self-learning components, doing effectively a parody, but in a conversational framework, allowing people to speak in a human capacity, to change their mind mid-sentence, to disambiguate, to speak in a way with a solution that can infer from context, has allowed us to break through the glass ceiling of their task completion rate. And we equated up to $24 million in cost savings year over year. So there's a direct impact to both the customer's experience by leveraging these small language models that are refined over time by virtue of interaction. And inherently, when they're refined, you can, over time, have probabilistic model that becomes, with maturation, more and more deterministic. Fewer tokens, fewer recalls, and less latency, right? When everything is orchestrated within the same system.
Yeah. So you hit on a lot of different things there, but so to back up, my personal experience with, Claude or whatever is counterintuitively, more context is not always better, right? If you keep the context window large, it's more prone to hallucinations or not doing what I want it to do, or pulling in something that's irrelevant into the conversation that I'm having with it. So it seems to be the best way to do it is to, have global awareness through projects or shared context files, right, for certain things, but to have discrete conversations or discrete tasks so that it is very focused on the task at hand as opposed to, and so I think you see that in how people are engineering or architecting their contact center experiences, where maybe, instead of training it on the entire knowledge base that your agents are using, maybe you have one small language model that's trained on how to handle payments and payment deferments, and then one that's trained on how to handle opening a new account, right? So this way, it's for a discrete task and it is not prone to hallucinations. And actually, that's a cost control measure as well, right? If the context window is large, then you're going to be using up a lot of tokens. And so I think that kind of leads to the importance of being able to route requests, and maybe not even full prompts or requests, but to be able to break apart what is being asked and then route it to the appropriate model and then aggregate the information back together. And you alluded to this earlier, but that is going to become more and more important for token optimization as well, because the cost of these different models is different, right? So there are some things where you need to use a frontier model. There are some things where you don't need to use a frontier model, and the cost difference in terms of token use is huge. So, maybe just kind of talk to what is the right way to kind of view that when you're building out your conversational intelligence workflows.
For sure. And it's interesting that you bring this up too, because it ties back to confidence and trust, right? Both from an enterprise perspective and being able to trust that the solution is going to say what it needs to say when it needs to say it without committing them to some sort of prolonged legal battle. But conversely, also to instill trust in the customer that once broken, they're not going to trust it again, that the solution is going to be able to service what they need, right? And I think you said it best, like you don't always need a massive LLM model to handle routine tasks, right? You don't need a huge LLM to be triggered and invoked and tokens spent when you're doing an account transfer. You don't need it to write poetry. You just need to say when, how much, done, cool. We don't need to do poetry, right? In the same vein, you don't necessarily need a Ferrari to go to the supermarket. It's expensive, it's costly, and that's what you're paying when you run everything through a massive general purpose large language model. And the problem here is tokens are really unpredictable, right? How can you forecast the token cost? But you said it best, tasks. Tasks are somewhat predictable, right? We know within our customer service flow, within our call center flow, that we have these self-services, these tasks that we want to automate. If that specific task needs to invoke the playbook, that small language model or an LLM, we can do that. But that's predictable because we can see the volume of calls of people that are expressing an intent to do a specific task. So a purpose-built small language model that is trained not only on industry verticalization, but is fine-tuned by virtue of the interactions is where the difference happens. And we're talking about a return on investment that is vastly accelerated, right? Because the insights you can glean aren't happening over the course of 6, 12 months. They're happening daily, right? Customers are interfacing daily. And we're at a point now where when you own the whole orchestrated technology that creates this solution, like with Omilia, you're able to scan and see how 100% of callers are interfacing with this. And that gives you that predictability for both cost and, task invocation.
Mhm.
Customers don't care what model is running. They don't care. They just want to get a fast response and something done really, really quickly.
And right.
And right, more importantly, right? And we go back to talking about to do something right across an entire enterprise, like Discover, Capital One, Royal Bank, whatever, you need to be really, really right. And you need to have that fine blend of both the probabilistic and deterministic model to come in play.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm rambling. Go ahead.
So I think that leads us to the next part of the conversation, which is simply auditing all of this, right? So we talk about explainability, but how do you get the visibility into the processes that the AI models are using to make these decisions, so that either from a compliance perspective, should you need to audit it, or from a legal perspective, should there be some sort of a lawsuit and you need to defend yourself? How do you go about implementing explainability?
So I think explainability isn't a feature. It's a means of protection for everything that's been invested into the solution, right? Because if you build a system that's robust, customers are trusting, it's improving it itself, it's orchestrated well. When a mistake happens, and invariably a mistake will happen, right? If you have disparate systems working together like an amalgamated kind of like Frankenstein monster, following the trail of breadcrumbs is going to take time. And it's going to have a lot of finger pointing across the different vendors and different people that are part of that fully orchestrated solution. So when things go wrong, it's really important to have visibility in the machinations of how the solution is running so that you can avoid it doing that again, right? You need to be able to see it. You need to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so create boundaries and guardrails around that. And to do that, you need to be able to show every step of the decision-making process that a conversational AI is making. And that starts all the way with, automated speech recognition, the accuracy of being able to understand somebody. And when you have that in place and you concatenate it with all the other services that are employed, the visibility into all of that is where the improvements really start to happen, right? And this kind of goes back to the Air Canada case we opened up with, right? They don't know. To this day, they still probably don't know why the bot decided to say what it said. But we do know for a fact that they were using a genericized LLM model. Whereas what we do is we take compliant, unstructured data in whatever capacity, and we can ingest that and ensure that the small language model is predicated on enterprise specific information, not genericized information. It also avoids situations where you can negotiate buying a Tesla for $1 from a Toyota dealership, right? So
Still overpriced, as mean.
yeah, right. Yeah, you got to pay me to drive one of those things nowadays. But at the end of the day, if your AI is telling a customer something, that's your company talking, right? So who do you want to have representing you? It is literally the glass pane of first contact interaction with your customer base.
Yeah.
If you can't explain why it said what it said, you have a huge liability problem and potentially a legal one. And it's not a technology problem; it's a design issue.
Yeah, I'm nervous because we have a chat on our website, and it's enabled by HubSpot. We use HubSpot not for the website, but it's got a feature. And when you chat on our website, it's Kylie. Kylie, she works for us. She's a human being. People don't always believe it, but she's real. You can go to amplix.com and talk to Kylie if you want, right? But what Kylie's not going to do is Kylie is not going to make a mistake and tell you, we can do something that we can't do, or she's not going to allow you to, use the chat to write Python code, or, these are things that are happening right now. Like McDonald's, for example, the chat on their website for a while, people were using it for everything. They were using it like it was Chat GPT, and people were writing code with it. And
that's crazy. Yeah.
So, that's obviously a waste of money, but it's a huge liability, like you said. So HubSpot has an AI feature, like an AI chat feature, and I'm nervous to implement it because I can't explain how it's getting this information to respond. And it's a black box to me, and I'm nervous that I can't control it. I think you said it right. Explainability is not a feature. I didn't mean to imply it was. It's a condition, right? It's a necessary condition when you're implementing AI to make sure that you're able to understand and prove and show people how it's operating. But what I don't understand still is is that inherent to the models themselves, or how do you go about achieving that condition?
I think a huge part of that is the necessitation for a solution that is orchestratable all within one platform, where there aren't any external codependencies or third-party codependencies. And I mean this from a couple of different reasons. One, who are you actually getting in bed with your data, right? Who are you giving that information to? Are you giving it to a company that actually leverages, is just a third-party orchestrator of other services? And also, how do you have confidence that the cost is always going to be what it is, right? Especially with everything that's happening nowadays with these huge data centers popping up, with the electricity going through the roof. If you don't own everything within the same tech stack, it's going to be very difficult to track down how these decisions are made. They don't live in a single repository. They're not learning from themselves. All that's happening between them is just an API call to push specific information. They don't care if it's right or wrong. It's just happening. So I think when these kind of questions happen, and even for you, it's important to ask an AI vendor when it comes to governance, show me exactly why your AI said what it said in this specific interaction. Not a summary. I don't want a transcription. Anyone can do that. The actual decision of how it got to where it happened, the chain, right? And if they can't do that, think about what happened again with Air Canada. But they need to pop the hood, and they need to show how the sausage is made. And if that can't show how the automated speech recognition is interfacing with the natural language processing components, the understanding components to then the processing components, then you have a vendor that is showing you shiny technology that is probably not going to go far. It might work well day one, but it's not going to learn upon itself. And it's not going to be able to be corrected with the same ease that you would need it to be corrected to protect yourself, really.
The learning part and the ongoing fine tuning and getting it dialed in is important. But conversely, there's a real risk of drift if you don't do that, right? So a model can start off performing the way that you want it to perform and expect it to perform, but over time, without continuous training and fine tuning, it can start to drift from its original way it was working. And you can end up very far apart from where you intended it to be and where it was. And so, what does it mean to actually keep a contact center AI stack up to date? Who owns that process? How does that work? What is the best practice to ensure that it doesn't drift and that it does get better?
I'd say we're at the point now where business users can make evaluation, at least within our own platform. Business users can make the evaluation of what the bot is suggesting, whether to accept the suggested changes, amend the suggested changes, or flat out reject the suggested changes. And what our system at least does is you say, hey, again, 7.2% of people are asking for deferred payment arrangement. That's the intent. This is how they're saying it, right? So collecting live information of utterances, like you said, some over-explain, some under-explain, of how to activate that intent. And then really it's about regression testing, making sure that those updates happen aren't breaking the whole entire solution. And in the past, and I think a huge difference, at least for our organization in the past year or so, has been not only the orchestration of these conversational solutions being with natural language orchestration. So I can just type out like you would type to Claude, hey, I want to create a bot that is doing an appointment booking for a doctor's office. These are the medical practices. Here's the API file, go. The other component there is that's changed a lot for us is the necessitation of the human in the loop, which I think is something that gets talked about a lot within AI. And the human in the loop has almost become redundant, at least within our solution in our enterprise. And what I mean by that is, we were kind of talking about it before, is when you have projects, when you have to push something to production, human beings are involved. They need to validate, they need to tune, they need to resource, they need to pay. And when reports come out, sometimes it's a whole steering committee that needs to make those decisions. For us right now is the human is not the integral part of the chain in the loop, but they become a supervisory component. So we've elevated the human being from a doer within an AI framework to a supervisor. The AI is going to be able to say, hey, this is what people are saying. This is how many people are saying it. This is how they're saying it. I've already created these task agents to handle these requests. Do you want to accept, refine, or reject? And once you hit accept, that goes into automatic regression testing and that gets pushed out. Because if you're not doing this daily, weekly, at least, you're going to start to have decay. And that's what you mean, drift, pertinence, relevancy, right? Things can happen. Think about being a utility company and even in the immediate, within a day, within hours, being able to determine, hey, we're having a preponderance of calls that are calling from this zip code or with calls with this area code. And they're all talking about, a huge outage. So now you can also, when people are calling in, say, hey, I know you're calling in. If you're calling about this, we know that there's an issue and we're getting it sorted. It'll be done by 1:30. Right. So predictive intent also comes into play there. And maybe I'm digressing a little bit, but stop me if I am. But I think that's really important, is being able to pivot quickly in a contextually relevant manner based on what customers are saying, what callers are saying to both the bot and the agent, right?
I don't think I can give you a hard time about digressing after I just gave a diatribe about philosophy and determinism. So you mentioned orchestration, right? And orchestration is, I think it's a word that is starting to grow in the lexicon of enterprise technologists, and it's going to become more and more important as AI becomes more prevalent within the enterprise, right? And it's this idea, I think, of making things work together, right? So maybe talk a little bit about orchestration and who's responsible for orchestration. What does that layer look like?
Yeah. So let's roll back a bit and just make it a little bit more tangible, right? So you got the right models for the right tasks. The system is learning, it's improving, all the things that we just talked about, right? Customers are building that semblance of trust and confidence in the solution, being able to handle what they need it to. But you need to ask yourself, what's actually managing that conversation? What decides when to use a small language model versus a large language one? And when to shift from that probabilistic approach to a more deterministic one? When to hand off to a human? All of these components are the orchestration layer, right? And nobody really talks about that because no one effectively sells it. No one talks about orchestration first. But let's talk about trust first. I'd say there's two things that really is important to trust and cost. When we're talking about trust, when a customer starts asking about their bill, a small language model should be able to handle that, right? You want it to be very focused and very refined. When a customer gets frustrated and escalates to dispute something, you're going to need a little bit more latitude and reasoning from a larger language model. But then maybe they want to go back in, change the amount they had on a transfer. You're going back to a deterministic one. So again, delving into that highly regulated PCI compliant kind of environment, the transitions between these, if they're clunky, there's going to be latency, right? And I think a lot of other vendors that use disparate solutions inherently fall into these things, right? Because again, going back to the notion of that Frankenstein monster, if you have different vendors, solutions working together through who knows what kind of spaghetti code, when something invariably breaks or one aspect of the chain breaks, the latency is going to create either frustration or mistrust. Customers are going to have to repeat themselves. Trust is gone. Like it takes one moment to get the trust gone. When it comes to cost, when you're having a stitched together stack, NLU from one vendor, ASR from the other, Gen AI from a third, maybe you have biometrics from a fourth to do authentication. It's 5 different points of contacts, lots of recollections, API calls, things that can break at any point in time. And also shifting costs. Like if you are using a vendor that is leveraging a third party or generic Gen AI, and they're like, hey guys, by the way, real estate's really expensive, electricity usage is really expensive, we're jacking up the price 20%. Who's going to eat that cost, right? And how can you forecast that comfortably over a 36 plus month term? Right. I think it's really important to have projectability. And when we're talking, for example, like token forecasting problem, multiply that across all the different vendors that constitute the Frankenstein of your solution. So when it's all fragile, good luck figuring out how to get that sorted out, right? And when you're dealing with things that are super important like utilities or medical components, right? Medical devices that are keeping people alive, that's a huge liability. And I don't think that's something that anyone can afford. So when orchestration, models, speech, dialogue are all built together and operated under the same roof, these transitions become invisible to the customer. The self-learning is seamless. There's no API latency because it's just one vendor, one platform, one view, one ring to rule them all. But it's really true, right? Is when you have full purview into how the solution is operating and how it's orchestrated, that's what's really important. And everyone talks about model this, model that, or like, oh, we're the vendor with the best credit union models. No one's talking about what connects the dots within. And I think that's where the hidden costs lie and where the trust breaks. If you don't have visibility into that, it's going to be a hard time, invariably.
There is so much complexity in what you just said, right? And so the more and more that you adopt AI and the more that you have all these different models handling all these discrete tasks, and the more that you have to have humans in the loop and you have to do regression testing and you have to optimize your token usage, at a certain point, when do you step back and say, are we over engineering this? There's a Twitter thread that's been going around as a meme that I've been seeing. I'm not on Twitter. I'm old.
Don't you mean X? Sorry, I'm not familiar with.
I'm too old now to start adopting
Oh,
new.
you and I both. Like, yeah.
It's not for me. It's not a political thing or anything. It's just a laziness, and I'm too old to change things. But so it's been going around, and it's it's like an AI expert or whatever. At least that's how he positions himself, and he's having a back and forth with someone, and ultimately he's like, we're finding that there are tasks that AI is not optimal for, and that there are human resources offshore that we're able to delegate these tasks to. And then the person, below them was like, oh, this guy just discovered employees again. And that's the trajectory that we're seeing in places, right? Like the Klarna thing, they got rid of, I forget, customer service reps basically overnight, and then they had to rehire a bunch of them back, if not all of them back, because the AI wasn't sufficient. Uber burned through a year's worth of token budget in 3 months, and now they're telling people to back off of using AI. You're seeing it with companies that are using Claude Code to vibe code things. And now they're starting to say, well, this is so expensive. It's actually cheaper for us to just hire a entry level developer to do these tasks. And so, like, is this going too fast? Are we doing too much? Are we overthinking, over engineering? Are we painting ourselves into a box by going all in on AI?
I think there has been look, man, like it's like anything that happens with human beings. When something new and technological comes to the fray, there's if it works and it's cool, like there's usually like mass adoption really quickly. Stress testing under the volume of pressure. I think there is the false assumption that, AI, we got to get AI. What is it going to do? What decisions is it going to make? And what are you trying to solve? Right? Like it's not a question of we need to get something. It's what do you need to solve? And when you're able to determine what you need to solve, that's when you can be very focused and specific on how to actually solve it with an AI. It's not a catch-all silver bullet that's going to solve everything. And our ethos, at least from where we stand, is AI is not meant to replace humans. It's meant to complement a human call center, keeping your most veteran, tenured, empathetic agents readily available to handle things that necessitate a human touch in a human environment, right? I remember working some time ago with a car manufacturer, and I asked them, like, what is the most frequently asked question within your contact center that your agents have to do? And they're like, man, sometimes our agents spend like 30, 27, 25 minutes talking to people about how to get their phone connected to the Bluetooth in the car. That is not something you need a human agent for.
Right.
That is a highly documented processed document. Sorry, a highly documented process. We can just ingest that and literally troubleshoot, walk through someone on how to do that. And they can talk to them in an agentic, in a free form human capacity. Oh, it's not working now. The screen's black. Oh, got it. I understand. That's frustrating. All right, let's try to turn off the car. And it's all of that, right? Like think about like the big fat car manual in your car. Have you ever opened that, Shawn? Have you ever read that?
I have not the whole thing, but
See?
yeah,
Okay. There's
long
there's
time
two
ago.
there's two kind of people who are like, absolutely, I need to know everything about my car. And other people are like, I don't even know, right? But that whole knowledge base on the technical specifications of what's going on with your car, that's a small language model right there. When we're talking about when we can determine that your intent is to understand what should the pressure be in the rear and the front, and being able to just ask your car and it leverage that small language model specific to you is going to give you the answer you need as quickly as possible in an accurate capacity, right? That's the best of both worlds, the deterministic and then probabilistic kind of thing coming together.
I tend to buy glitchy cars. And so, before the internet was a big thing, the manual was my respite for trying to understand why this light's on and won't go away.
Yeah, the check engine light.
Any light, there's a lot of lights.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at least I hope you're not one of those people that just puts like masking tape over it and, I don't see it. It's not a problem. But
No, I'm
yeah,
one of the people that throws money into a pit every time a light comes on because I buy these foreign cars that aren't easy to fix.
yeah, I hear you. But yeah, I think I digressed a little bit, but did that kind of hit the point of what you were trying to ask?
It does, absolutely. But, it also kind of raises the questions about employment, right? And jobs. And, there's obviously a lot of concern about how AI is going to displace jobs. And I think personally, I believe that that's very much overhyped, at least for the near future. But the contact center is a great example of why I think it's overhyped, because everything that you just said in the last, 15, 20 minutes or so, humans are required at different points in those processes. And so I think it's just the same humans doing different things instead of, being a frontline agent that's dealing with all the, quick, easy, difficult, frustrating things that people call in about. Have an AI in front of that. And then you have that same agent that is doing the training and doing the supervising, right? So they become a supervisor of AI agents. And so that job gets preserved and it gets upskilled to some extent. And, maybe in the future, they don't have to hire as many people to keep up with growing volume because they can add another agent to that person's team, right? That they're supervising. So I think there's cost savings in that way. But there are opportunities, I think, here for people to get trained and deployed in different ways in the enterprise rather than being replaced by AI. I don't know. What do you think that looks like in the future? Even
Well,
orchestration, right? Like
yeah.
that's going to be a place where people have to have specialized training and jobs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I do think it's a little overhyped, and I think it's funny. Like it's aligned with what you see in movies, right? And that's what kind of people assume that we're all going to be out of jobs. It's going to be the most dystopic kind of universe possible, which in many ways, is pretty dystopic right now. But when you're talking about jobs itself, like it's going to create new jobs, right? It's the jobs are just going to be different, right? So maybe you're no longer a call center agent or maybe a designer, but you'll be a supervisor of what the AI is doing and refining and fine tuning and double checking the regression tests and ensuring that you know how to manipulate the solution to do something a little bit different than how it's suggested. Those are things are going to happen. Those kind of jobs are going to happen, right? And this is just commonplace iteration with technology, right? Things change, but human beings adapt. We're highly adaptable. And yeah, in short, new jobs will be created that complement the technology that is emerging for
Yeah.
sure.
We're adaptable as humans, and enterprises are infinitely adaptable as well. Sometimes you don't think of it that way, but just by virtue of the fact that we're having this conversation about AI and how quickly it's grown, I think you can see that when the opportunity is there, enterprises do adapt. So it'll just be interesting to see what it looks like. Earlier in the conversation, you said something that made me think about market intelligence.
Mhm.
I remember exactly what it was, but it was this idea of kind of mining the contact center data, I think, to maybe, develop a new feature, or maybe to find white space for a new product or new markets or whatever it may be. So, how do you think about these interactions as data that can feed product marketing?
So we've been talking a lot about like protection and cost so far, right? And experience and trust. This is where we kind of start to flip the equation a little bit. Every interaction, at least for us, is a data point. And most enterprises are sitting on millions of different interactions without really extracting any of the value from them. And like, if you need to understand how to generate more revenue and generate more customer loyalty and brand loyalty, how else do you suggest doing that other than just listening to what your customers are saying? And that's what I was talking about earlier, right? If you don't have the ability to extract all the qualitative and quantitative information from an interaction, either with the bot or the agent, who are you going to learn that from? Like a steering committee of 20 people who don't leave the office and are trying to determine like what their customers are saying based on word clouds and stuff of that nature? No, it's about being able to see like, hey, again, say it's a utility company, 12% of people in passive or in passing are saying, hey, like, is this enough wattage to charge my EV? Right? Like, how many solar panels would I need that? Or maybe they're just saying like in passive, like, hey, do you guys provide solar panels or anything? Right. And if you have the wrong models in place and says, sorry, I didn't quite catch that, or let me get you to an agent that can handle that, you're not learning. Right. So being able to capture that intent, that understanding, say, hey, we're getting more people asking about solar. Maybe we should not only determine who's calling about that, but we can create like a very hyper focused, granularized marketing campaign towards those people. And the siphoning and siloing of data, when compounded with proper, homogenization, or sorry, not homogenization, but like taxonomy and understanding like who's asking for what,
Right.
allows you to be very point specific towards smaller user groups, right? And so, wow, when I get a call outbound that's asking me about maybe not solar panels, but like maybe about upgrading my car into a new lease, that maybe only 2% of the full caller pool or customer pool actually want, and would be financially unfeasible at a greater way. But if it's a 2% and you can just drive that hyper granular, very targeted marketing approach to them, that's going to make them feel great, right? That's going to buy customer loyalty. That's going to drive behavioral change towards a brand and an enterprise, right? And we also saw that within Taco Bell, right? With them when the AI came into place for the food ordering and the quick serve capacity, we saw not only a higher accuracy towards what's going in the bag, but less employee churn because we're removing that atrocious point of contact between potentially rude customers and, frustrated employees. And we're also literally driving P and L, like P, not the L, by having more consistent upsells, right? When you're thinking about working in an environment that requires selling something, you're driving someone down a purchasing funnel. You want to add churros to your cheesy gordita crunch, right? Someone that's not invested in the outcome of the company, they're just there to, to take an hourly check, hourly wage. They're not going to care if they sell the churros or not. The AI doesn't care either, but it's going to do what it's told. Right. And so when we're talking about, again, the siphoning and siloing of data to be able to have granular user profiles, I think is huge. Right. And I don't think a lot of enterprises are doing that right now. frankly.
Yeah, the old way of doing things from a marketing perspective, like market research, is you rely on generalized market data. You do competitive research, and that's, you know, challenging sometimes to get really good detailed information, depending on the space that you're in. And then you do stakeholder interviews and focus groups and surveys, right? But you're always limited in some respect to how much data you can compile, because you can only talk to so many people. It's only feasible, I mean, you're hiring a marketing agency. It's going to cost you a ton of money. The more stakeholder interviews there are, if you're doing it in house, there's a bandwidth issue. You can only talk to so many people, right? So if you can layer in a broad set of data that's highly specific and specialized to your environment and your business, it's incredibly valuable. But it's also there's so much value in the real time nature of it as well.
Right.
Market opportunities are sometimes something that are wrapped up in timeframes, and so the faster you can recognize a trend and an opportunity and act before your competitors act to fill white space, the better off you're going to be. And you don't have to wait for that next cycle of going through, doing that kind of manual analysis.
Yeah, it's a pivot from the notion that AI is supposed to just be a cost saving and trust inducing experience. And it's more about being able to parse conversations as revenue growth that you've never seen. Right. And it's from the horse's mouth. It's the customers, the callers asking what they want. Give them what they want. You have the information, leverage it, make the solution better. There's no excuse really.
Not anymore.
Not
So we're coming up on an hour here, so I'm going to leave on this question. The people that are listening to this that are evaluating or considering moving into a conversational intelligence type of solution for their contact center, what are a few questions that you would suggest they ask their?
I would go back to what I was saying earlier and really ask about where the data is lying. Where is it passing on to? What is the concatenation of how the logic is being played out? When I say something, how is it being parsed? Show me all of that. And don't accept no for an answer, right? Like, oh, well, it's just a demo. No, that's not an answer. Even if it's just a demo, if it's your technology, you should be able to break open the black box. So to answer your question directly, show me exactly what your AI thought I said and how it parsed my intent and utterance, right? And maybe that's poorly worded, but show me the decision-making process. What happened 6 months after launch, right? For learning, what happened 6 months after launch? How are we going to improve the solution? What tools do you have in place to give us insights into how the solution is not only making the decisions that I just asked you to show me, but how it's going to learn upon them, and ideally in an automated capacity, right? Because you don't want to be on the hook for six-figure professional service fees every 6 months. You want a solution that's going to leverage the data that you're being given by the people that are using the solution. And last but not least, cost certainty, right? All of these three things, cost, governance, model selection, which is also trust, all circle around who am I actually giving my business to? And what are the components that you are leveraging in-house and out of house to drive the experience that you're proposing to me? That's, I think, one of the most important questions. What third-party dependencies do you have to make your solution work?
I think that's great advice, and those are some questions that we haven't heard yet. So, John Diatto, grazie mille.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for your time. Thanks for your time and expertise today. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Happy for it.